So if you could give a really, really, really warm welcome to our very own Mr. Mahr. Oh, he's even getting a standing O. I mean, before you even speak.
Thank you. They said they were going front row. I didn't really believe them. So anyways, my name is Riley Mahr, or Mr. Mahr, to most of you, in case you didn't really know me, because I don't get to know a lot of you sitting over in the art room. Not all of you step in every day. So just so you know, art room, it's over, near Senior's room and Mrs. Penz's room, all that fun stuff. If you ever want to stop in, I'm relatively friendly. Not terribly, but kind of. Anyways, I am kind of in a unique position because I'm a teacher here, and I am relatively young. If you've noticed, I can't even grow a beard yet. Well, some, seniors are out there with, just giant lumberjack beards, so it's kind of weird for me. But I am 23 years of age, and I just graduated from college about a year ago. So I am in kind of just a unique position where I know a lot about what you guys are going to go through in about the next 4 years for the seniors. For, the juniors, obviously, maybe the next 5, for, sophomores, 6, for even some of the seniors, maybe the next 12. As who knows. But some of you are going to graduate and you're going to enter into the workforce. Some of you will go to college. Regardless of what you do, I felt the need to kind of come up here and just provide some of the stuff I've learned, especially, going through college with me, that I would have really liked to have known before I stepped out of the school and went to university. So I graduated in the year 2011, which wasn't that long ago. In fact, the seniors that are sitting in front of me, if you were at CLS when you were in 7th grade, I would have been a senior when you were in 7th grade, which is kind of weird to think about, that we were like in some of the same chapels, and you probably saw me doing something stupid around the school. But I was here. So I graduated in 2011, and I proceeded to go ahead and I went to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. To which everybody's first response is, "Hey, bro, you party?" To which my response is normally like, "Be quiet, do your work." But I went straight to the University of Wisconsin in Madison, which is a huge university. It was kind of shocking going there at first because, there's maybe 350 people in this auditorium right now, somewhere in that ballpark. I lived in a freshman dorm that had 1,500 people, so 1,500 people in that dorm alone. So that was just the freshmen I lived with in a building. There were also more buildings for a total of about 7,000 for the freshman class and a total of around 40,000 for the entire school between the freshmen, sophomores, juniors, seniors, super seniors, graduate students, PhD students. It was a school of about 40,000, which is just kind of crazy when you think about it. I went from a relatively small community to a large community. And part of it was overwhelming, but a lot of it wasn't. So if anybody here is scared about coming out of high school and going to this really large university, it's not too bad. You kind of make your own community and it ends up being as small as you want it to be. So I just kind of wanted to share some lessons that I learned because I went through that experience. And the first of which is you're going to go into college and you're really going to have to learn responsibility because when you get out of high school, you're in high school right now. You go home, your mom's there. She, probably makes dinner, or, you might make dinner, but still it's probably the food your parents, pick up at the store. So you don't always have control over what you eat. Some of you may have a car. It's something that your parents might have helped you with. They might have not, but they still probably gave you some advice. You have guidance in high school. You have people that are really kind of showing you what you should and should not be doing. And that is nice when you're in high school because you're young, you make mistakes. But in college, that first day is really fun because you and 50 of your new best friends are all sitting in a room and you're like, I have no friends, I don't know anyone here, and I don't know what to do with myself. And again, at first it's like, oh, that's weird. And then you finally realize, I can do whatever I want. This is going to be awesome. So, if you want to go to the supermarket, buy an entire cake, sit down and eat that entire cake, you can do that. You're probably going to hate yourself for the experience, but you can do that. But that also leads to a few other things. For instance, if you don't want to do your homework, no one's going to make you do your homework. If you don't want to go to class, no one's going to make you go to class. So funny stuff like that are kind of weird about going to college. But there's a lesson you have to learn there. It's you become responsible for who you are as a person. So you choose whether or not you do your homework. You choose whether or not you go to class. You don't have a parent harping on you the whole time. You don't have any of that. So while I'm up here, there are a few misconceptions that I hear every now and then because I, have some of you kids in my class. And believe it or not, your parents can hear you when you're talking to them. So not your parents, or your teachers. Maybe your parents, I don't know. But your teachers can hear you when you're talking amongst yourselves in your little groups at your tables. We're not, totally deaf. And some of the things I hear are kind of funny about college. For instance, a lot of you believe that once you go to college, you're not going to have to go to lecture. You don't have to go to class. They don't take attendance. That's false. They do. There's this new thing called technology that they make you buy little buzzers that you go to lecture, and they put a question up on the board, and if you answer or if you don't answer, they take your attendance. If you don't answer, you weren't there. Homework. You do have to do homework in college nowadays, especially if you want to go into science. It's important. It's part of your grade. You will get weekly homework to do. So in a lot of respect, college is very different than what some of your parents might say, because when I was about to go to college, I had the same thing from a lot of my parents. Sorry, water break. That they're like, oh, you don't have to go to lecture, you don't have to do homework. It's just like, hey, you're going to have like one paper due, and then you're going to have the final. That's not true anymore. College is structured a lot differently. There's a lot more homework, and especially with the advent of technology, because usually when you go to college, you're going to have access to a plethora of computers, all that fun stuff. You'll have like weekly papers you have to turn in. It's really easy for professors to say, hey, do a 2-page report, turn it in on Friday, just email it to this email. So a lot of that stuff is a little bit different than you might think it is. So when you go there, you're going to have to be responsible for your homework. And a lot of you, are. Some of you have trouble getting homework in on time right now. Just, it doesn't really change. But last little point I wanted to make is everybody was always also thrilled that they can wear sweatpants to class in college, and that is true, but the phrase dress to impress doesn't go away. So it helps you if you dress a little nicer. Your professors look better on you. But again, so you end up in college or, not in college somewhere, and a lot of people go a little bit crazy because, you can do anything. You can really go anywhere you want. And you tend to develop some vices as a result. I'm up here because I'm not perfect. I had a little bit of a rough experience in college. Not too bad, but just a little bit, where I didn't really know what to do with myself for a very long time. And, I ended up coming out with an art major, but I went through a lot of different stuff in there to try and figure out what I wanted to do, what I'm good at. And part of that was me not trying to, part of it was me figuring out how to be responsible with my classes, with my homework, that kind of stuff. So that did steer me a little bit, because I'm a little lazy, but I did fine. But you get out there and you are with 50 of your best friends, and you're free to do whatever you want. And this is interesting because obviously I went to UW-Madison, that's known as a party school. You can choose to go out and party, and it's your decision to do so. Nobody's going to stop you. If you go to UW-Madison or a different university, you can choose to stay in, do a Bible study. Nobody's going to stop you from doing that. But one of the things I really wanted to emphasize is that whatever you choose to do, it's your choice. Nobody is going to really push you into something or pull you out of something, not as much as you might think they will. My notes are crazy. So nobody's going to push you into something or out of something, but the opportunity will always be there. It's up to you to decide what you take on as an opportunity. So some of you may go to really small colleges and you'll be like, oh, well, there's a lot of opportunity for going to study group or going to like a Bible study or something like that. There are a lot of opportunities there, but no matter where you go for a college, it will also have the opportunity to avoid that. It will also have the opportunity to go out drinking, to do drugs, to engage in behavior that we would consider very, very bad here. I'm not going to list them all because you probably know them all already. But those opportunities are going to exist no matter where you go. And that's another little misconception that I've heard from a lot of people, and especially parents think that. They think that depending upon where you go, it will affect what you are able to do. But the opposite is usually kind of true. No matter where you go, everything will be there. The only difference is whether or not people are really hush-hush about it, or they just speak openly about it. So since I was in a very liberal community, I had a situation where everybody spoke super open about everything. Everything was just out on the table. Nothing was hush-hush. But I had friends that went to very small private Christian universities. All this stuff was still there. The only difference is they had to hide it from their teachers, from the administration, all that jazz, that kind of stuff. So just so you know, no matter where you go, you're going to have to work on yourself as a person, and you're going to have to make the decisions of what you engage in, how you define yourself. So with that being said, it's really different ranting in front of my class as opposed to the 300 people in here. There's like a lot more people. It's like weird because it's like you kind of choose people to make eye contact with, not because you're trying to emphasize that point, but just because you know them. And it's just like there's so many people. Hi, Philip. Thanks for waving. They were all talking about how they're going to distract me today, but so far it's working. So you will really define what you do. But, again, as I kind of stated a little bit before, not many people are going to push you into doing anything. And I've got a little bit more to talk about that. But at the same time, not many people are going to push you out of doing something. And this is really what I want to get around to is, how many 50 million times during this I'm going to say you define who you are. But it's a really important point. What I've found is that just kind of a blanket statement, and it's not always 100% true, but when you get out of here, you're going to find a world where nobody really cares what you do. And to some extent, that's kind of great, because a lot of people spend a lot of time sitting up late at night worrying about what's going on. They worry, will people like what I wear? Will people like what I do? Am I going to be that funny person that gets a lot of attention, or am I going to be that person that kind of says something that I think is funny and then it's really awkward and nobody wants to talk afterwards? You guys can relate. That's going to happen a lot, but what really ends up happening is nobody really cares who you are. And again, that's partly liberating and partly kind of sad because nobody cares. Where am I in my notes? So you're going to get out. Nobody's going to really care what you do. So it's left up to you to decide what you do. Josh. Now they're making snoring noises at me. So nobody really will care what you do. I'm sorry, I keep losing my spots on my notes. I should probably just unfold them. So again, liberation. Nobody cares what you do. That means nobody is going to force anything poisonous upon you. Nobody is going to come up to you and say, hey man, let's go out, let's drink. I know you got an assignment tomorrow, you have all these responsibilities, but let's go out and let's drink. Nobody's going to come up and say that. Actually, they will. But the thing is, you can always say no. And that is another really powerful thing that you will have at your disposal, is you can always say no. So let's say your friend comes up to you and says, hey man, do you want to go smoke? 99% of the time, if you go, nah man, I'm cool, they'll leave you alone and they'll be like, okay dude, and they'll walk away. So also learn to say no when you get to college, and then that whole thing about nobody really cares is going to come to light, and nobody's going to care that you say no. So don't be worried about anything. Don't spend an inordinate time thinking about what other people will think about you. Just realize that they probably don't care. That's a kind of ubiquitous, it's all over thing, something I've seen with this generation in specific. And I kind of feel I'm a little bit part of your generation because I grew up with a lot of the same stuff. Again, I'm not that much older than you guys, but I grew up with a cell phone. as opposed to, some of the other teachers. I know what Snapchat is. I had a Snapchat when it first came out. I know, right? So when you're on your phone and I see what app you're using, I know what you're doing. And also, you're not that sneaky. But since nobody cares, nobody's going to challenge who you are as a person. And that's kind of concerning, because a lot of people will hear about, those college days, or those watch that college movie. That's all about, somebody finding themselves, when in reality, you go to college, nobody cares. Nobody's going to challenge who you are as a person. So let's say, this is my specific, story. You go to college. I did not go to church for about a year after I graduated from here, because it was kind of annoying. You had to wake up on Sunday morning. You had to get out. You had to go to church. You had to just kind of sit there. You didn't really know anybody. And then you left. You went home. That didn't sound like something very appealing to me, so I didn't bother going to church. And since nobody really cares what you do, I was never challenged in that regard. And I spent like an entire year not going to church. And it was even worse than that, because I didn't even go to small group. I didn't really have anything faith-related that I was doing. And since nobody challenged who I was, I did not feel a need to grow in that. And since nobody challenged who I was, I didn't even feel a need to back out of this really stagnant faith that I had personally. Since nobody cared, I didn't feel the need to care myself. And that's a really dangerous mentality, and it's something that I really see happening a lot right now, because it happened to me, happened to so many of my friends as well, that all of a sudden we were in the situation where we had to care about something, but why would we bother caring? That required effort. It required us to get out and do something, and we didn't want to do it. So that, in general, is kind of it's what I've seen to be the most prominent vice facing, A, myself. I'm not a perfect person. I know that's a surprise. But B, a lot of you guys as well. And I'm not, directly calling one out and being like, you're lazy. But I didn't even know you were sitting there. I pointed at a lazy guy. But since you don't bother to care, you end up in the situation where you neither grow nor do you step back. You just stay in the same spot. And I want to just kind of talk about how dangerous that is. So in the Bible, I know the Bible, there's a lot of stories, parables that Christ tells that are very important because they relate something that he's thinking about to terms we can understand. So you guys probably all know some pretty famous parables. Some of them are, the sower sowing the seed, and some of the seed falls on the road, and because it falls on the road, it doesn't grow, and it falls among rocks, and because it fell among rocks, it doesn't grow. That's one of the parables. But one, I don't want to call it a parable, but just kind of quick metaphor that's used repeatedly in the Gospels that I've come to really appreciate and like is where Christ talks about how people will be judged. And it's just really quick. If he brings it up, it's only like a paragraph, but it's repeated. I counted 9 times throughout the Gospels as I quickly scanned through them, and then afterwards I remembered I could have just Googled it, and I got really mad at myself. But about 9 times it talks about how a good tree will bear good fruit, and it will be recognized by that good fruit. And a bad tree will bear bad fruit. Bear bad fruit. That's like a tongue twister. And it will be recognized by that bad fruit, and it will be, chopped down, burned for lumber, whatever happens to it. But again, he repeats that analogy about 9 distinct times. So it really shows how you can operate and how you can judge yourself a little bit by God's standards by knowing if you're bearing good fruit, you're probably doing pretty well. If you're bearing bad fruit, you're probably doing pretty bad. But we're in this awkward middle portion where if you don't care enough to do anything, like I didn't care enough to do anything. I didn't care enough to bear bad fruit. I didn't care enough to bear good fruit. you're left in this awkward middle where what happens when a tree just isn't bearing fruit at all? And there is then one kicker that really kind of demonstrates that as well. And this is repeated in both Matthew and Mark, where Christ is going out and he gets up in the morning and he walks out of his doorway and he's like, hey, I'm hungry. So he goes to a fig tree. And that fig tree is not in season, it's not bearing fruit. And Christ sees that, and he sees that there's no fruit on that tree. So there's not good fruit, there's not bad fruit, there's just no fruit. And he goes up and he says, may no one ever eat from you again. And the tree withers and dies right there on the spot. And I think that's a really good kind of cue for how we can know that, just not caring, just not bothering to do anything will work out for us in the end. And this, you could be growing a lot spiritually, but you could also be very stagnant in other areas of your life. And this works really well to kind of apply to everything, to think, in this area of my life, am I bearing good fruit? And then addressing that for yourself. So if you're bearing bad fruit, it's bad. If you bear good fruit, it's good. But if you bear no fruit, it's just as bad. So it's not okay to not care. It's not okay to just stop moving. And that was something I really had to struggle with as a person and work on myself. So that can be applied to faith, which I kind of talked about. That can be applied really to academics, because some of you might just be coasting through academically. You might just be like, oh, I did it, whatever, I got a C. That's a passing grade. Is it really the best you could have done? Are you really actually trying to bear good fruit? Or are you just coasting through and not bothering to bear fruit at all? And that is, just ridiculous. Because in college, when you're responsible for your own academics, you don't have your parents there to say, hey, are you doing your assignments? Are you doing well on them? You have to sit down and think for yourself, am I doing what I want to be doing right now? And not just what I want to be doing right now, but what I want to be doing for myself so that I will be bearing good fruit down the line. So that's something that I really struggled with upon going into college, and something that I would have really liked to have heard before I got there. But you need to be able to challenge yourself, and you need to be able to think, how can I take this on? How can I bear good fruit? So it's really fun when you get to college. I always think of, everybody knows that one person that they constantly don't do well in things, and then they say, only God can judge me. And I always think it's really funny because he left us, the Bible, and it gives us a pretty good idea of how he's going to do it. It's are you bearing good fruit? With that being said, I have a little bit of advice on how to bear good fruit. Some stuff I've found that really helped me work it out, helped me bear that fruit that I want to bear. And again, I'm not perfect on this, and also figuring out what kind of fruit that you want to bear is difficult sometimes. I'm not here to speak about that because that's an entirely different thing. But if you remember, Mr. Pinner talked a long time ago, well, not too long ago, where he talked about how each machine had a different purpose. That is kind of how you need to figure out what fruit you need to bear. Some of you will bear fruit of the Spirit, where you will go into ministry and you will essentially, jazz up a church to be this awesome place for a bunch of believers to come to. But some of you will bear fruit in other areas. Some of you it will be academically. And some of you it will be socially. But you need to understand that if you're not bearing fruit in areas, regardless of whether or not you're meant to bear fruit in that area, you should still be trying. But anyways, I've got a few hints on how to bear good fruit, and these come from personal experiences I've had, and I've got some cool stuff to equate them to. For instance, the first thing is bearing good fruit, you need to try, and you need to have a mentality where you say, I will go for this. And there's a really, really cool book called The Screw Tape Letters. Most of you have probably heard of it. And C.S. Lewis says a little thing in there that I absolutely love. And it's basically about how I need to be able to go to this goal. And he's talking about how God looks on us as his children and how that relationship works out. And he says regarding God, he wants them to learn to walk and must therefore take away his hand. And if only the will to walk is really there, he's pleased even with their stumbles. And that, when I first read that, it kind of hit me deep because it really showed me how I should be trying to bear fruit. I'm somebody that if I mess up, I get super caught up on it. Like if I have I'm an artist. If I have an art piece and something's going badly, I'm the guy that just, takes the canvas, boots it out the door, and I'm done with it. Whereas if I want to really be successful, I need to know that if the will is there, I can move forward. And even if I stumble occasionally, it's okay. If a good tree has one bad fruit, they don't really get rid of the good tree. So you will occasionally stumble and fall, but that's okay as long as you get up and keep going, because that's really important. It doesn't say it's okay if a child stumbles when he's trying to walk. It says it's okay if a child stumbles as long as the will is there to keep moving. It's okay if a child stumbles, gets up, and keeps moving. Too many people, especially in college, go around and they're, like, oh, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to major in biology. And then they get into a biology class and they realize it's hard. And then they give up on it. They turn around and then they go, oh, I'm going to major in, physics. And then they go into physics class and they realize, oh, this is hard. And they stumble and they don't bother to pick themselves up and try to keep moving. And then usually, they're like, oh, I'm going to go major in art. And, they just let anyone major in art. So it's okay. Should have seen some of my classmates. They were really funny. I took an advanced carpentry class because why not? And one guy submitted a desk and it had just a bunch of holes in it. And it's like, why are there holes in it? And he goes, oh, I forgot where I was with the drill press. So he's just randomly drilling holes in a piece of wood. Anyways, art students are interesting. If you ever get a chance to take an art class, just take an art class because it's so much fun. We're all a bunch of weirdos. But anyways, as long as the will to keep moving is there, you will move. And that is so true. As you will stumble, you will hit blocks, but you got to be willing to get yourself up and keep moving. The second one is we see a lot of chances in life. We have a lot of moments where like, oh, that would be cool, I should do that. And we think about it and we think about it, and we never bother to do it. And I do this a lot. I have 50 million art projects I have planned out that I'm never getting around to. If you're in my classes, you've probably seen me start like 20 projects that I've never finished. And there's a really, really fun story I found that actually has to do with this. So I'm an artist. I get weird. I get little random obsessions a lot, just, my new weird thing of the week. And most recently, it has been fairy tales, but fairy tales from Russia. So they're really, really weird fairy tales. And like 95% of them, I would say, are about a guy named Ivan. And he's always like the youngest brother, and he's always described as a simpleton, which is really funny. But this has nothing to do with a guy named Ivan. But there was a Russian fairy tale I read that was really, really interesting because it demonstrated this principle perfectly. And it's basically summed up, in modern English because, some of the words are weird how they phrase them. I don't read Russian, I'm just reading a translation, so it's weird. But this guy's walking along the road, and he's a peasant. He doesn't have a lot of money. And while he's walking along this road, he sees in like the tall grass next to him, a little rabbit pops out. And he's like, oh, look, a rabbit. I can catch that rabbit. I can take that rabbit to the market. I can sell it in the market. At the market, then, I'll have some money. I'll buy a few pigs. Those pigs will give me piglets. They'll grow up. Those pigs will then give me piglets, and I'll have even more pigs. And on these pigs, he was going to found his life. He was going to take these pigs, and he was going to sell them, and he was going to use them to buy land and a giant house, and then he was going to marry just a hot babe, and she was going to give him 2 sons, and those sons were going to grow up and be big, strong men, and they were going to employ the workers of his field, and he was going to be old, and he was going to sit on his porch, and he was going to yell at his sons, you don't know what it was like back in my day. And with that, the rabbit ran back into the bush, and it was gone. All of a sudden, his sons, his fortune, his wife, his land, his pigs were all gone because he spent the entire time thinking about how awesome this thing would be if it's done and never actually bothered to do it. We do that all the time. Think about how many of you have thought, oh, it'd be super cool if I did blank. And then you spent all day thinking about how cool this thing would be. And then you spend all night thinking about how cool this thing would be. And then it's 3 weeks later, and you never bother to do it. And I mean, think about how many times you may have done that with homework. It's 3 weeks later, you still haven't done it. It's scary. So that's something huge that for bearing good fruit, you need to know to be able to do, is if you see an opportunity, you need to take it. And as you move forward into college, that's going to be huge. And you're going to be surprised at how many opportunities you have that you just need to bother to go up and you need to take. For instance, if you go into journalism, every single college has a school paper. Speaking from experience, they let pretty much anyone into the paper. You just need to bother to do it. So there's so many people I knew that were like, I should write for the paper, and they never bothered to actually do it. I actually had a roommate that's like, hey, I wanted to draw a comic for the paper. He actually drew a comic, he gave it to the paper, they're like, this is cool, he's now published. Because he just bothered to do it. It took him like 20 minutes. It was awesome. But you need to bother to be able to go out and do things. If you want to go into business, during college, you will need to get an internship at some point. Just some summer where you go and work for a business and you kind of learn the ropes a little bit. Your counselor will constantly email you opportunities that have come up. And so many people read through those emails and they go, oh, that would be so awesome. That would help me out. And then they never bother to actually pursue it. So when you're on the road, make sure you bother to take those opportunities and see them through. Finally, well, not finally, just nextly. Once you know what kind of fruit you need to bear, you will always find a way to do it. Sometimes it may take a little bit of persistence, but you will always find a way to do it. So for instance, again, I'm an artist. I'm going to bring that up like a million more times. But I always find a way to make art somehow. So if I'm working on a painting and it's not working out, I can move to maybe like, graphite or charcoal or some other medium, and maybe it will. But I'll always find a way to produce that end goal of mine to somehow do what I was meant to do to bear some good fruit. So I've got another little story that I think is awesome, because I love silly little stories. And this is about one of God's most holy creatures, a truly blessed thing we have on earth, and it's about a spider. A group of students, and I believe this is actually a true story, by the way. A group of students won the ability to send something into space. And, out of all the things they could have sent into space that would have been interesting, they decided, hey, I'm going to send a spider. So the spider, gets in a cage and it goes up to space. And it's just like, oh, hey, I'm in space. I should do what spiders do and I should build a web. Spiders build webs. That's the fruit that spiders bear. It's terrible fruit, but it's the fruit that spiders bear. So he's in space, and I don't know if you've ever seen a spider build a web. You probably haven't because you're not a psychopath. But they essentially anchor themselves, and they swing around. And using that swinging motion, they're able to go from wherever to wherever, and that allows them to establish, the general supporting structure they need for their web, and then go around it with, the sticky stuff to spin a giant thing of death. But that depends on a really interesting topic that some of you may have experienced called gravity. So all of a sudden, this spider, you can just imagine him like this little 8-legged dude wakes up in space and he's like, I'm going to spin me a web. And then he attaches a piece of, whatever web stuff. And he flings himself out. But instead of swinging like he normally would, he just randomly goes and dinks off a wall. So he can't actually figure out what's going on because there's no gravity. So he's put in this situation where he doesn't know how to do what he's good at. He knows that he's meant to make a web. That's all he knows how to do. He can't do anything else. So he tries again, ding, just bangs off a wall, tries again, ding. And I'm picturing a little spider, not a huge tarantula. I don't even, do those even make webs? I don't know. But also it's a little spider in a spacesuit. So think about a little 8-armed, he's got the helmet. Each time before he's ready to swing across the chamber, he opens up the helmet, makes angry eyes, and then closes the visor again, and then swings across. But he's going across this chamber, and he keeps failing to make a web. And eventually he gets so frustrated he can't handle it anymore. So he just kind of wags his arms really fast because he's frustrated. And then he realizes, wait a second. And that spider actually figured out that if he does the same motion he does when he swims in water on Earth, he actually can move through the oxygen that's in his container to keep him alive, and using that, instead of swinging, he was able to build a web. So all of a sudden, through his frustration, he found just a new little way to be able to do something and do it well. And that's awesome because you will constantly experience those things. There will be a million roadblocks in life, and especially in the next 4 years, you will need to find a way to get through it. And as long as you persist, as long as you keep going, you will make it. If you want to, write your report, sometimes you need to sit down and you need to just go for it, and you need to be persistent, and you will figure that out as you go through. Surrounding persistence is a really cool little part of Matthew that, if I can flip to, talks about it. And that is Matthew 7, verse 7 through 8. And it says, "Ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives, he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks the door will be open." It's persistence. Somebody is like, "Hey, I want something." So he asks about it. He's like, "Hey, I want something." It's not enough just to ask. So he seeks it out. And he can't necessarily find it. So eventually he knows where it is. He goes to the door and he knocks and he finds it. It is about persistence when it comes down to these things. You will be in numerous situations where all you have to do is keep going. And you'll figure it out. Finally, and it is finally this time, my last point is something I learned both in college and I had to learn it as an artist. Because this was a huge point, and it's something that I find stops me from doing things a lot of the time. And that is, do not compare yourself to somebody's highlight reel. We are in a society where we literally have something called a wall that we like to post pictures of ourselves. And they're never like, "Oh, feeling ugly today, have a bad hair day," and you take a selfie. It's like, "Hey, I'm done up, I'm gorgeous, good hair day," and #blessed or whatever you kids do nowadays. You kids throw that up, and it's really interesting because you get this persona on Facebook that's like this highlight reel. I don't really pay attention to Facebook because I'm a hipster. But I do pay attention to online portfolios of artists. And what I've found is a lot of times I'll end up sitting there bummed out and I'm really cranky because some artist just posted this beautiful work of art. And it took me a while to realize that this isn't like their sketchbook. This isn't what they put together at 3 in the morning. This is their crowning achievement. This is their highlight reel. The best things they've done, and this is what I'm comparing my everyday to. And that stops me a lot. And then the other thing is it's a highlight reel. You don't necessarily know what they've been through. You don't know what they're going through. I had an artist that I saw him, and his stuff was just awesome. So I actually bothered to look him up and do a little bit of research. Turns out, he's about 15 years older than I am. And that made me think, why am I comparing myself to this? He's 15 years older. He's had 15 more years to practice something than I've had. That's an insane amount of time. Can you guys think about how long 15 years is? Some of you aren't even older than 15. Some of you don't act like you're older than 15. But don't compare yourself to somebody's highlight reel. And this has a lot of uses because I also learned another little lesson when it comes to ministering and talking to people about God and faith. Because I never saw myself as a perfect person. I never saw myself as that really good Christian. I went to church, I did a lot of Bible study, but I was always kind of the jerk in the back that's like, I don't know if I trust this. And I always thought that was kind of a vice for me. But what I realized is I was comparing myself to these people that were they had the gift of the Spirit. They, could preach all day and they could talk forever about Christ, how he's impacted their life, but you're watching their highlight reel. You're watching them at their best moments and comparing it to you when you're just at your day-to-day. So don't let that stop you from doing something. If you're going into science, don't let, the fact that you look at some of these scientists and just these amazing things they've achieved, don't let that stop you from going into science. Don't let that stop you from going into dance, music. It works better in art just because art's flashy. But don't let the fact that other people are great stop you from trying to get there. Because odds are they spent years persevering, taking opportunities, and trying to bear good fruit to bear that just awesome, awesome fruit. So you're going to leave this school, and some of you sooner than others, and you're going to go out and you're going to enter into a situation where you have to decide what kind of fruit you want to bear. And you're going to struggle through all this stuff. I'm not saying that all of you are going to stay in the church. I really do hope you do, and I really do hope if you leave, you come back to it. Just because I've found that the number one reason that people leave the church is they turn 19. So if you can avoid turning 19, that would be great. But just because you're on your own, you have to make these decisions. You have to make convictions about who you are and what kind of fruit you will bear. And you don't always know what to do. You're not always there and you know exactly like, oh, I'm going to do this. I'm going to be awesome at this. You see an opportunity, you take it and you go for it. There will be some confusion. There will be a lot of times where you're just kind of sitting there and you're like, what do I do now? But as long as you kind of follow through, take opportunities, pray about it, decide that you yourself want to grow as a person, you should end up bearing good fruit in the end. So with that being said, I believe I actually hit my time, which is awesome. I was freaking out about that. But if we could close in prayer, I believe, is it okay for them to be dismissed? Yeah, cool. I don't know the protocol. I never pay attention. So please bow your heads in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for this awesome weather as we move forward into spring. Obviously, please be with these students as we start actually closing out the year. It's a weird thing to think about. But we're entering into our last quarter of school on Monday, and please be with them. Help them finish out strong. And Lord, as we go forward and as students start to leave the school, please help them bear good fruit. Help them be those people that are constantly motivated. Help them be those people that just decide to do well and to grow in and of themselves and to have success in your name. Lord, in your name we pray. Amen.